I am Brett, a 34-year-old architectural engineer from Boston. The bond I shared with my mother was unlike any other relationship in my life. She raised me on her own until cancer took her when I was 19. When I met Jessica 2 years ago, I thought she was the one despite the subtle warning signs from her family. I never imagined a family dinner would become the moment that changed everything between us forever. Before I dive into how I stood up for my mother's memory, drop a comment letting me know where you are watching from, and hit that like and subscribe button if you believe family should always come first. Growing up in a modest apartment on the outskirts of Boston, it was always just my mother and me against the world. She worked 2 jobs most of my childhood, starting as an administrative assistant during the day and waiting tables at night. Despite her exhausting schedule, she never missed a single one of my baseball games or school events. I was her entire world, and she was mine. My mother taught me everything I know about respect, integrity, and resilience. On the rare occasions when we both had a day off, she would take me to the Museum of Fine Arts or the Boston Public Library. Those were the moments that sparked my passion for architecture and design. She always told me, "Brett, build something that will outlast us both." That advice guided me through college and into my career. When she was diagnosed with breast cancer, I was 17 and in my senior year of high school. The 2 years that followed were filled with hospital stays, chemotherapy sessions, and moments of false hope. I still remember the sterile smell of the oncology ward and how my mother would insist on putting on lipstick before her doctors came in. "Always face the world with dignity," she would say, even as her body was betraying her. The night before she passed, she gave me her sapphire pendant. It had belonged to her grandmother and was the only piece of fine jewelry she owned. One day she whispered, holding my hand with what little strength she had left, "Give this to someone who honors where you came from." I promised her I would, never imagining how significant that promise would become. After her death, I threw myself into my education and career. I graduated from MIT with honors and secured a position at a prestigious architectural firm in downtown Boston. By 32, I had a solid circle of friends, a fulfilling job designing sustainable buildings, and a comfortable life. The only thing missing was someone to share it with. I met Jessica at a local coffee shop on a rainy Tuesday morning. The place was packed, and she asked if she could share my table. She had striking blue eyes that reminded me of my mother's pendant, and an infectious laugh that filled the small cafe. We talked for hours that first day, long after our coffee had gone cold. She was a pediatric nurse, compassionate, and dedicated to her young patients. Her stories about helping children through difficult medical procedures resonated with my own experiences of hospitals and illness. Our relationship progressed naturally and joyfully. We spent weekends exploring New England towns, hiking in the White Mountains, and enjoying quiet evenings cooking together in my apartment. Jessica was thoughtful and kind, bringing me soup when I caught the flu and surprising me with tickets to architecture exhibitions. I believed I had found someone who understood me completely. 6 months into our relationship, Jessica introduced me to her parents, Harold and Diana Westbrook. Their house in Beacon Hill immediately revealed the vast difference in our upbringings. Crystal chandeliers, original artwork, and antique furniture filled every room. Harold, a corporate attorney, greeted me with a firm handshake and appraising eyes. Diana, a socialite who chaired several charity boards, offered a cool cheek kiss and a practiced smile. During that first dinner, Harold asked about my family background. When I explained I was raised by a single mother who had passed away, Diana tilted her head sympathetically and said, "How unfortunate for you to come from such an incomplete home." Jessica quickly changed the subject, but the comment lingered in the air like an unpleasant odor. As our relationship deepened, I noticed more subtle digs about my upbringing. Harold once remarked, "It is remarkable how well you turned out without a proper male influence." Diana frequently referred to families with 2 parents as normal families when discussing their social circle. Each time, Jessica would squeeze my hand under the table or give me an apologetic look, but she never directly confronted her parents about these comments. Despite these warning signs, I was convinced Jessica was different from her family. She seemed to value my perspective and respect my background. When I shared stories about my mother, she listened attentively and asked thoughtful questions. I believed her heart was genuine, separate from the elitist attitudes of her parents. On our 2nd anniversary, I took Jessica to Carson Beach at sunset. It was where my mother and I had spent countless summer days, and where I had scattered her ashes. As the sky turned brilliant shades of orange and pink, I knelt in the sand and proposed with a ring I had designed myself. The band incorporated small sapphires that matched my mother's pendant, which I planned to give Jessica on our wedding day. "I want to start a family with you that honors both our pasts," I told her, as tears streamed down her face. She said yes enthusiastically, throwing her arms around my neck and kissing me deeply. When I explained the significance of the sapphires, she seemed touched by the gesture and promised we would find a way to honor my mother at our wedding. That promise gave me hope that despite her parents' attitudes, Jessica and I would build a life together that respected where I came from. I could not have been more wrong. Wedding planning began almost immediately after our engagement. Jessica's parents insisted on handling most of the arrangements, citing their extensive social connections and experience with formal events. "We know all the best vendors in Boston," Diana declared during our first planning meeting at their home. And the Westbrook name opens doors. What started as helpful suggestions quickly morphed into complete control. Each time I offered input about the ceremony or reception, Harold would interject with, "Let us handle this, son. You focus on your buildings." Diana would follow with, "We know what works for these types of affairs." Jessica, who had once valued my opinions, began to echo her parents with increasing frequency. My attempts to incorporate elements honoring my mother were met with resistance at every turn. When I suggested displaying a small photo of her at the memory table, Diana scoffed. "Wedding ceremonies should focus on beginnings, not endings. We do not want your guests reminded of death on such a joyous occasion." When I proposed playing one of my mother's favorite songs during the reception, Harold dismissed it as inappropriate for our social circle. Even the idea of lighting a candle in her memory during the ceremony was rejected as unnecessarily somber. Jessica, who had once been so understanding about my connection to my mother's memory, began to show signs of impatience. "I know she was important to you, Brett, but this is our day. Do we really need to make it about your mom?" 3 months into planning, I overheard a conversation between Jessica and Diana while they reviewed floral arrangements in the dining room. I had stepped out to take a work call, but returned quietly through the side entrance. "Brett seems fixated on including his mother in everything," Diana said, with obvious distaste. "It is rather morbid, do you not think?" Jessica sighed audibly. "I know. Sometimes I worry he never properly moved on. He talks about her like she hung the moon." "Well, darling, that is what happens with these single-parent situations. Unhealthy attachments form. Thank goodness you are bringing him into a proper family now." They laughed together, a sound that cut through me like glass. When I entered the room moments later, Jessica smiled as if nothing had happened, but something fundamental had shifted between us. When I tried to discuss what I had overheard later that evening, Jessica dismissed my concerns. "Mom is just old-fashioned," she explained. "And you have to admit you do talk about your mother a lot. They are just trying to give us the perfect wedding." The guest list became another point of contention. When I submitted names of people important to me, including Linda, my mother's best friend who had been like an aunt to me after my mother died, Diana reviewed the list with a furrowed brow. "Who are these people? They would not fit in with our crowd." Most of my selections were eliminated, including Linda, who Diana described as not our kind of people after seeing her profession listed as high school teacher. It was becoming increasingly clear that the Westbrooks viewed me as a project to be molded rather than a person with a valuable history. The class differences between our families, which had seemed insignificant during dating, now loomed large in every interaction. In an attempt to preserve peace, I scaled back my requests. "All I really want is to incorporate my mother's sapphire pendant into the ceremony somehow," I told Jessica one night after another tense planning session. She frowned, twisting her engagement ring. "Do we have to?" I was thinking of wearing the pearl set that has been in my family for generations. The sapphire would clash with my dress and the wedding colors. The pendant was the last thing my mother gave me before she died. I reminded her. She asked me to share it with the woman I married. "You are obsessed with the past." Jessica snapped her patience, visibly thinning. "Our wedding should reflect our future together, not your grief." Her words stung like a physical blow. I retreated to my apartment that night instead of staying at her place as planned. As I sat alone holding the pendant, I called my best friend Tyler for advice. I am worried she is becoming more like her parents every day, I confessed after explaining the situation. Tyler was silent for a moment before responding. Brett, I have tried to be supportive, but I have to ask, are you sure Jessica is the right person for you? The woman I have seen lately does not seem to respect what matters to you. I dismissed his concerns, convinced that things would improve once the wedding stress passed. She is just caught between her parents and me. Once we are married, we will establish our own traditions. But the tension only increased as the wedding date approached. During a visit to the venue, Jessica's parents dismissed the inclusion of wildflowers similar to ones my mother had grown in our small apartment window box. Those are common roadside weeds, Diana declared. We have selected proper arrangements from the premier florist in Boston. Jessica nodded in agreement, no longer even attempting to find compromise. She had become more demanding and less compassionate, with each passing week her personality seeming to merge with her parents' elitist attitudes. Despite my growing unease, I remained hopeful that our relationship could be salvaged. The engagement dinner at the Westbrook Country Club would be an opportunity to connect with Jessica's extended family and perhaps find allies who shared more reasonable perspectives. The Westbrook Country Club stood as a monument to old money and exclusivity. Crystal chandeliers hung from coffered ceilings, illuminating the room filled with Jessica's extended family. Her aunts, uncles, cousins, and family friends, all dressed impeccably, sipping champagne and exchanging pleasantries. I had spent extra time getting ready that evening, wearing a tailored suit and carrying my mother's pendant in my pocket. I planned to mention it in my toast, explaining its significance and how it represented the blending of our families. Despite all the tension during planning, I still believed in the foundation of our relationship. Harold greeted guests with booming confidence, clapping backs and kissing cheeks. Diana floated through the room like a queen at court, her designer gown catching the light as she moved. Jessica looked stunning in a blue dress that matched her eyes, introducing me to relatives with practiced charm. "This is my fiancé Brett," she would say. "He designs those marvelous green buildings downtown." I was reduced to my profession, my identity simplified for easy consumption by her family. Her cousin Franklin, a finance executive, with a perpetual smirk, shook my hand too firmly. "So you are the architect who swept our Jessica off her feet. Quite the achievement for someone from your background." Her Aunt Margaret studied me through narrowed eyes. "Jessica tells us, your mother raised you alone. How unusual for you to have turned out so presentable." I swallowed my discomfort and responded politely to each backhanded compliment and thinly veiled insult. For Jessica, I told myself. This is all for Jessica. Dinner was served with ceremonial precision. 5 courses of exquisite food presented on fine china, accompanied by wines selected by Harold himself. As dessert was being cleared, Jessica squeezed my hand and nodded, indicating it was time for my toast. I stood clinking my glass gently to gain the attention of the 30 or so guests. The room quieted as all eyes turned to me. "Thank you all for being here tonight to celebrate our engagement." I began, my voice steady despite my nerves. When I met Jessica 2 years ago, I knew she was special. Her compassion for her young patients, her bright spirit, and her kind heart captured me completely. Encouraging smiles from around the table gave me confidence to continue. My mother taught me to recognize genuine goodness in people. She raised me with the belief that character matters more than circumstances. Before she passed away from cancer, she gave me a family heirloom, a sapphire pendant, and asked me to share it with someone who would honor our family story. I reached into my pocket, touching the pendant for reassurance. Tonight I want to share how grateful I am that Jessica has embraced not just me, but the values my mother instilled in me. The pendant represents the connection between my past and our future together. Harold cleared his throat, loudly interrupting before I could continue. "Well, let us not turn this happy occasion into a funeral," he said with a forced laugh. Several guests chuckled uncomfortably. Diana added, her voice dripping with mock concern. "Some people just do not know how to move on from the past. It becomes quite the burden for everyone around them." My hand froze in my pocket as I looked at Jessica, expecting her to defend me or at least show discomfort at her parents' remarks. Instead, she laughed lightly and added, "Brett does talk about his mom a lot. Sometimes I think he forgets we are trying to plan a wedding, not a memorial service. The room fell silent for a moment before Jessica's cousin Franklin jumped in. Sounds like someone has serious mother issues. Did you check if the wedding package includes a therapy session? Laughter erupted around the table. Some genuine, some clearly uncomfortable. Jessica's uncle Bernard raised his glass and called out to Jessica for taking on a project with so much baggage. More laughter followed, and Jessica smiled, though her eyes darted nervously toward me. She did not contradict them. She did not defend me or the memory of my mother. She sat there complicit in their cruelty. In that moment, everything became absolutely clear. Time seemed to slow as I looked around the table at the people who would become my family. These people who found humor in mocking a son's love for his deceased mother. These people who saw my background as something to be overcome rather than respected. And Jessica, the woman I thought shared my values. The woman I believed would stand by me. The woman who just participated in ridiculing the most important relationship of my formative years. I felt strangely calm as clarity washed over me. There was no anger, only certainty. I could not marry into this family. I would not disrespect my mother's memory by joining with people who saw her life and influence as something shameful. I gently set my napkin on the table and stood again. The room quieted, perhaps expecting an angry outburst or hasty exit. I appreciate the clarity this evening has provided. I said, my voice even and controlled. I have been struggling with concerns throughout our engagement, but tonight has confirmed what I needed to know. I turned to face Jessica directly. I will not be marrying into a family that disrespects the memory of my mother. She sacrificed everything to give me a good life, and her love shaped me into the man I am today. Gasps and murmurs filled the room. Jessica's face drained of color. Brett, they were just joking. You are overreacting. No, Jessica. For the first time I am seeing clearly. This pendant, I pulled it from my pocket and held it up. The sapphire catching the light was meant for someone who would honor my family's story, not mock it. Someone who would stand up for me as I would for them. Harold rose from his seat, face reddening. Now see here, young man. We have invested considerable money in this wedding already. I will reimburse you for any non-refundable deposits, I replied calmly. Consider it payment for this valuable lesson. I placed my engagement ring on the table. The sapphires that I had so carefully selected to match my mother's pendant now seemed like a mockery of what I had believed our relationship to be. I wish you well, Jessica. I hope someday you understand what it means to truly respect someone you claim to love. With that, I walked out of the country club, nodding respectfully to the few guests who had not joined in the laughter. My steps felt lighter with each foot I placed in front of the other, as if I was walking away from a weight I had not fully recognized I was carrying. The drive home from the country club that night was surprisingly peaceful. I rolled down the windows, letting the cool evening air wash over me as I made my way back to my apartment. When I arrived home, I placed my mother's pendant on my nightstand and sat on the edge of my bed, expecting to feel devastated. Instead, I felt something unexpected relief. My phone buzzed continuously with notifications. Jessica alternated between tearful voicemails pleading for forgiveness and angry texts accusing me of humiliating her in front of her family. You could have talked to me privately, one message read. You deliberately embarrassed me because your feelings were hurt by a few harmless jokes. I did not respond that night, or the next day. I needed time to process what had happened and what it meant for my future. Harold called 3 days after the dinner. His voice was stern and businesslike. We have already paid the caterer a non-refundable deposit of $8,000, he stated without preamble. The venue requires another $15,000 if we cancel now. I will be sending you an itemized list of expenses. Send it, I replied simply. I will cover the costs. You realize you have damaged Jessica's reputation with this stunt. He continued. People are talking. I hope they are, I answered. I hope they talk about how a man should stand up for his family's dignity. I hope they talk about respect and what it means in a marriage. He hung up without another word. My best friend Tyler arrived at my apartment that evening with takeout and beer. I heard what happened, he said, as he unpacked containers of Chinese food. Jessica's cousin Madison is dating my coworker. Word travels fast. I am sure I am being painted as unstable or ungrateful. I sighed, accepting the beer he offered. Actually, Tyler responded, a few people were impressed. Madison said her grandmother told Harold he should be ashamed for speaking that way about a deceased parent. That small validation helped strengthen my resolve in the days that followed. Other friends reached out with messages of support. My colleague Samantha brought coffee to my office and shared that she had left a relationship for similar reasons. You cannot build a life with someone who does not respect where you came from, she told me. You made the right choice. 2 weeks after the engagement dinner, I visited the cemetery where my mother was buried. I brought fresh flowers and sat beside her gravestone, telling her everything that had happened. I almost gave your pendant to someone who would not have valued it. I said aloud, my fingers tracing the engraved letters of her name. But I remembered what you taught me about dignity and respect. I remembered that I deserve a partner who honors all parts of me, including being your son. To process my emotions more thoroughly, I began seeing a grief counselor, Dr. Marshall, who specialized in complicated bereavement. You are not just grieving the end of your relationship, he explained during one session. You are processing how this experience connected to the loss of your mother. I journaled regularly, writing letters to my younger self and reflecting on the lessons I was learning through this experience. Gradually, the pain of Jessica's betrayal began to lessen, replaced by appreciation for what the relationship had taught me about my own values. 1 month after ending the engagement, Jessica asked to meet for coffee. Against Tyler's advice, I agreed, feeling I could now face her with composure. She looked smaller somehow, sitting at the same cafe table where we had first met. Her eyes were puffy from crying, but her voice was steady. I miss you, Brett. I think we can work through this. I talked to Mom and Dad about being more respectful. It is not about them being more respectful, Jessica, I explained gently. It is about you not standing up for me when it mattered. It is about discovering that we do not share the same fundamental values. They are just old-fashioned, she insisted, echoing her previous excuses. They did not mean to hurt you. That is exactly why this could never work, I replied. You still do not understand why their behavior and your silence were so painful. You see my devotion to my mother's memory as excessive rather than as an essential part of who I am. She left the cafe in tears, and I felt a pang of sadness but no regret. I was increasingly certain I had narrowly avoided a lifetime of having my background and values diminished. I threw myself into work, taking on a project designing a community center in the neighborhood where my mother and I had lived. The building would include affordable housing units, a library, and a small garden dedicated to cancer survivors. Creating something meaningful that honored her values helped heal a part of me that had been wounded long before Jessica. 6 months after the broken engagement, I donated what would have been our honeymoon fund to a cancer research organization that had supported us during my mother's illness. The director invited me to tour their new facility, and I found myself sharing stories about my mother with people who understood the impact of cancer on families. On the 1-year anniversary of the engagement dinner, I visited my mother's grave again. This time, I brought not only flowers, but a small architectural model of the community center that was now under construction. I stood up for you, I told her. But more importantly, I stood up for myself and what you taught me about self-respect. I would not have had the strength to walk away if you had not given me the courage to know my own worth. By this point, I had begun dating again cautiously. I met Lindsay, a literature professor, at a charity auction for the Cancer Research Center. Our connection developed slowly and authentically. When I showed her my mother's pendant and explained its significance, she asked thoughtful questions and shared stories about her own grandmother, who had raised her after her parents divorced. I would love to have heard your mother's stories, Lindsay said one evening, as we looked through old photo albums. She sounds like someone who understood what matters in life. This simple statement confirmed what I had come to understand through my journey. True love includes honoring each other's past, not just planning a future together. The greatest lesson I learned from walking away from Jessica and her family was that dignity cannot be compromised for comfort or convenience. Respect must be the foundation of any relationship, and that includes respect for the people and experiences that shaped us. Today, I wear my mother's pendant on a chain close to my heart. It serves as a daily reminder of her love and the values she instilled in me. I am surrounded by friends who appreciate my complete story and a partner who sees my background as a strength rather than something to overcome or ignore. Sometimes the most courageous decision we make is not about who to include in our lives, but who to show the door. Have you ever had to make a difficult choice to honor someone you love? Share your story in the comments below. If this resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to hear more stories about standing up for what matters. Thank you for listening, and remember that those we have lost are never truly gone when we honor their memory through our actions.